So you're looking for a DMing style that doesn't require as much week-to-week prep? Well, you're in luck, because behind today's secret door, the Living World DM style. So behind today's secret door, the Living World DM style. This is Secret Door, a channel devoted to in-depth discussion about Dungeons & Dragons, and my name is Matt Morich. I have started a Patreon. If you're interested in supporting the channel, your help would be greatly appreciated and much needed. And many thanks to Marcelo and Doug for your support. The link will be in the pinned comment and in the description. So this video should be pretty quick. This is a discussion of a DM style that I refer to as the Living World DM style. It's the DM style I use whenever I possibly can. There are many reasons I really like this style, and one of the chief ones is that it does require a lot of prep, but it's all in the very beginning, before the campaign even really starts. And what's advantageous about that is that your enthusiasm for the campaign is always at the highest at the beginning, before anything starts. That's where everything is all exciting and you've got all these ideas. That's the time where most of this prep will happen. And then after that, you're still going to have prep from week to week. Don't get me wrong, but it'll be much, much less. So this style is essentially a sandbox style. It is definitely a sandbox style, but it's a sandbox style that is extraordinarily dynamic. The world, as I've referred to it as the living world, that's why. The events, the world will change as time marches by. You could also call this, just as accurately, the ticking clock DMing style. What this style doesn't cater very well to is a strong sense of story. Now, that may turn you off right here and now, but what I mean by that is when you're DMing in a campaign that has a very definite story and only the player characters can solve this problem and all those kind of things, I'm not trying to mock that. But if you're playing in that kind of a campaign, there's a certain level where the player always feels a certain level of certainty that they'll succeed. After all, they're the only ones that can do it. And to a certain degree, they may even feel plot protected by the DM for that very reason. This style of DMing throws that right out the window. Now, having said all that, it doesn't mean that there can't be stories within that framework of the Living World framework, or however you want to refer to it. It's just that they are not going to be stories that are probably going to carry you from the very beginning of the campaign to the very end of the campaign. Those stories, in fact, will probably be about the characters and not the world. And that, to me, is far more interesting. So I'm going to talk about just how I don't even want to use the term structure, but I guess I will. I'll really just be going over how you approach this in a structured sense of how to run a Living World campaign and what the highlights of that are. In this kind of style of a campaign, the focus is on the characters, and therefore it allows the players to be really forward in what they want to see about their characters. If the character has a desire or a plan, this is the kind of campaign where a player can really sink their own teeth into it and make a change in the world, and the DM can be free to reflect that change in the world because there is no commitment to a story. So if you have a group, if you're a DM and you have a group with very strong players, they don't even have to be strong role players, really. If strong could be that they understand the game very well and they play really, really well. And if they're strong role players, that could be a mix of either. They're maybe not mechanically as gifted, but they're very gifted in role playing. It doesn't matter which end of the extreme they may be on. Strong players are going to enjoy this kind of a game because they will recognize the freedom that they have and the ability to go and do the things that appeal to them. Now, I don't have a blow-by-blow description for you as to how exactly you should run this. I will tell you in general terms how I do it. And it's going to sound at certain points like it's a lot more work than normal. But remember, 90% of all of the work you're going to be doing in the campaign is in that beginning stage. And in that beginning stage is where you have the enthusiasm, and it's going to be a joy to do that, as opposed to the week by week slog of having to prepare this encounter and this encounter and this encounter. It's much easier this way on a week-to-week basis. Now, the first question you have to ask yourself is, are you going to run this in a homebrew world, or are you going to run it in a D&D setting? Both of these styles have advantages, but if you're going to do a homebrew world, remember that your players have no context for that homebrew world unless you've been using that homebrew world in previous campaigns. But if you use a campaign setting, they're far more likely to be familiar with those places and who's who in the zoo in a campaign setting established for D&D. So I'm going to assume that we're going to be talking about a campaign setting here. And this is one of the really great things that I love about this style, is I really don't use published material in terms of like modules and stuff like that. I don't personally do that when I DM. But what I will grab every time is a setting source book. A setting source book for this style of DMing is invaluable. It's doing a lot of the legwork for you already. Some setting source books are better than others. If you have a good setting source book, though, like I said, it will take care of definitely the lion's share of the work for you. What you need to do as a DM in that beginning stage, you've got your source book, and then what you do is you pick three. I'm going to say 3. It could be any number. It could just be 1. It could be 10, whatever. But I'm going to pick 3. What I refer to as points of power. Now, these 3 points of power, that each individual point of power could be anything. It could be a king. It could be a great wizard. It could be an ancient dragon. It could be a lich, whatever. It doesn't really matter. You pick 3 of those that you are going to say, these are going to be the movers and shakers during this while the players are playing in this campaign. These 3 points of power are the ones that are really aggressively trying to do something special in this time. Now, it's not required that those 3 points of power be in conflict with one another. In fact, it's better if they're off doing their own things. And likewise, I don't think it's necessary that they be supporting one another in any way. That, like I said, if they're doing their own thing in just different regions of the setting that you have, it's going to allow for them to impact the world as the campaign progresses. So let's take an example as a lich as being one of the points of power that you selected just for the sake of example. So let's say that lich, in this point of power, this lich is trying to gather together the orbs of dragonkind. It could be anything, but let's say that. What you want to do is, or at least how I do it, is create, and you could do this on paper or you could just keep it in your head, whatever, but an organizational chart under the lich. So you have the lich, you have that lich's captains, and the captains have their lieutenants, and the lieutenants have their sergeants. I'm not talking about an army structure here. I'm talking about a power structure. So if the lich is seeking at the top of the chain, and the lich's goal is to get the orbs of dragonkind, it's going to issue orders in some relationship to that, to those captains. And those captains will issue some form of order like that to their lieutenants. Now, what I mean by that is the lieutenant may be executing an order that has seemingly nothing to do with those orbs of dragonkind. It may be executing an order that is a simple one little part of the puzzle that they need to achieve to find one of those particular orbs. So the further you get down on that organizational chart, the smaller and smaller and smaller and less grandiose the goal becomes for that particular agent. And it's at these points that the player characters will integrate with that point of power. This allows you to have an enormous amount of flexibility for having these things show up and drop them right into the characters' paths. Or, of course, you could entice the players in one form or another in the campaign setting to pursue that particular agent. So great. So now while all that is going on, the player characters are now involved with that agent and they deal with that particular thing. And maybe they discover right then and there that those orders came from another part of the chain. It doesn't have to be that quick. But regardless, while that is going on, the world keeps turning. And this is why I really love this style of campaign. So those other 2 points of power that haven't been interrupted at all, they're marching along with whatever their plan is. And the player characters will be able to receive information, and this is critical in this style of play, that you grant the players some form of news that's going on in the world. And it doesn't have to be incredibly obvious. Remember, as I said earlier, the lower you get down on the organizational chart of that point of power, the less obviously important those tasks will be. But as time goes along and those other 2 nodes of power, points of power, are growing and getting further and further and further along, the news that is coming to the player characters is going to be much more dramatic. And this is where it gets interesting, because then the players have to start making choices. Let's say they've been dealing with the Lich and they've been focusing on dealing with that. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if they're completely focused on that and that alone, those other 2 points of power are now growing, and you're going to be hearing much greater news that is going to be ever increasingly urgent. So what are the players to do? Do they continue on the point that they have started, or do they try and put out a fire over there? And if they put out that fire over there, what are they letting slip over with the Lich? It's these kind of dilemmas that make the campaign interesting and give it texture, because the player characters are not going to feel as if they're saving the world or something like that. They're going to be lucky to feel as if they're putting out a fire in their own little corner of the world. Now, having said all that, it's incredibly difficult. I shouldn't say that it's difficult. It's incredibly important that you don't make the player characters feel helpless, that no matter what they do, something is going to win. You don't want that kind of a feeling. So even though these other points of power are marching along, the stakes that those 2 points of power are trying to grab shouldn't be the world. Okay, so it should be something small, like the Orbs of Dragonkind. I mean, is it going to end the world if the Lich gets them? I mean, it's probably not good, right? If they went ahead and did something else, they're going to have to deal with that Lich with those Orbs of Dragonkind at that point, and who knows what that will do. But creating that sense that there is always going to be something that's critical and needs to be dealt with creates an ever-present sense of drama and urgency in the game world. But as I said, keeping those stakes relatively small, like I said, not the world hangs in the balance, not this kingdom will fall. Well, I guess a kingdom is okay, but you want to keep the stakes more local and more personal to that point of power. These are what that particular point of power is really trying to pursue for themselves. And in a way, they're playing the game too. So one thing that will help you keep this a bit more structured is to create a kind of a checklist along with that organizational chart. And while you may have the tasks that everyone that's underneath that chart is trying to achieve, that can become a kind of a checklist. And check off how much time it would take for them to do that. So if the player characters have taken a month dealing with the Lich, that's a month that the other 2 points of power get to advance their goals. Maybe that's enough to achieve one of them, or maybe not. And you can be very flexible with this. You could create a slight time dilation for the other 2. Maybe they're having more difficulty with it in achieving what they're after. So maybe it takes 6 weeks for them rather than a month, so that the world isn't just hurtling forward. But that's entirely up to you as the DM and the kind of pace and the kind of sense of urgency that you want to establish at the table. For sure, any one of those things that's on that list they may be stalled. It may be something that's going to take them 6 months or a year to figure out how to do. If ever, they may not even be able to achieve the goal that they're looking for. And as an offshoot of this entire idea, it can be really fun. And you have your points of power, but what if there's another adventuring party that's an adversarial party to the players, and you give them their own list that they're integrating with? And they will be able to be antagonists to the player characters who are developing in parallel to the player characters. And they may be serving one of those other points of power. So that's really it. I mean, how you really start with all this is start looking through the source book. You really need to be pretty well informed about that setting. And I like finding for points of power, I like finding things in the source book that are just kind of throwaway characters. They aren't the main character, big points of power that you would obviously pick. I like finding the little ones in the background that are trying to make a play for something. And not all 3 of these points of power, if you use 3, have to be equal in power. I mean, you have a lich and you could have, the Thieves Guild or what have you, or a member of the Thieves Guild doing this. It could be anything. But they are advancing their intentions, and these are the things that the player characters have to deal with, or don't. That's the beauty of this as well. It is a sandbox. You're allowing the players to make the choices that their characters would want to pursue. Now, this style of play is not going to be for everybody. When I've DM'd in the style of play, I've had players look at me like dumbfounded, like they don't know what to do. It does require players to have a certain level of experience for this to be really successful. So just keep that in mind. But if you've never tried it, it's a lot of fun, and your players may really enjoy it. Well, that's all I've got. If you enjoyed the video, please like, please share, please subscribe. And if you're stuck and you don't know where to go, you can always search for a secret door. Until next time, I cast bless on all of you.